In this lesson, we want to talk about scope within functions and how we can work with variables as opposed to global variables and local variables that are only accessible within the function. Now, although that might sound complicated, the concept is really straightforward. Whenever we're defining a variable such as b, this is actually going to be a global value. And as we can see, we've got access to it even within the function. So anywhere within the script, we have access to it. And that's what we mean by a global value. But whenever we have a function, and if I was to take that same value or define something within the same way within the function itself, so running out of names for functions, but maybe I'll just call this one my fun. And if I was to redeclare a value of b within my fun, and maybe I'll declare it, so maybe I'll just do variable bb, so not to confuse our previous code, and I'll give this one a name of global, and then over here I'm going to do variable bb, and I'm going to call this local, or within the function, within the scope. So what happens when I console log out bb? And better yet, what happens if I console log out bb before I even declare a value for bb there? So a number of different things happening here, that whenever we're going to call this function, we're going to run through and we're going to run through console log and we're going to output bb. And you might be expecting to see our global value bb, and then here we're setting a value of bb and we're giving it a value of local, and then we're console logging out that bb. So there's going to be something that's going to happen here that might not be expected. So when I refresh it, we see that initially we have an undefined value of bb. So if I was to actually get rid of this and we refresh it, we see that I'm just going to respell that global, so that's correct. We see that this time when we output it, we'd have a value of global there, which is very strange because when we define bb, even though we're running through the same console, we're getting an undefined value. So what's happening here, and this is important to understand how JavaScript actually runs through and handles values that it sees and how it works with values. So we've got the ability to declare a value, but over here JavaScript is aware that this value of bb is registered within the function, and when we're trying to call it here, it's going to actually say, okay, well, you're trying to call the value before you're declaring the value, and that's why it's returning undefined. And basically what this means is that JavaScript actually runs through the code on a first pass and understands how the structure is and how the variables and values are going to be set and output within the script itself. So that's the first run, and then that means that essentially it knows that we're redeclaring bb here within the function itself, and it knows that we're not going to be using the global bb, we're using the bb that we're declaring within the function, and that's why it's coming up undefined, because on the second run through when it actually outputs the values, it hits this and it says, okay, well, I haven't declared a value for bb yet, and I know I'm not trying to use a global value because I know that I'm declaring it here within the function, and that's why it comes up undefined. And yes, of course, declaring values before you use them is always best practice, but it's important to understand that this is the way that the values are being handled within JavaScript, and this is the way that they get rendered out. So if you're going to use something locally and access it locally, make sure that you declare it right off the bat before you try to use it and access it as well, in the same way that you do it within the rest of the code. Because even if JavaScript is aware of the fact that that is a contained value and that is a variable that's going to be used. It's not going to output the value until you've declared that value itself. So let's see what happens here when we do BB. So now maybe what happens here when I want to output BB. So I'll just do it this way. And so what do you think the first value of BB is going to be? What do you think the second value of BB is going to be? And what do you think the third value of BB is going to be? So let you think about that for a second. And notice here that we're calling it out 3 times. First time, we've got the function, but we haven't initiated the function. So we're just console logging out BB. We've got a value of BB here of global. Second one, we're hitting function. We're running through here. We're setting a value of BB as local, and this is where we're outputting that function. And then lastly, over here, we're consoling logging out BB. So what do you think? Global, local, global, or what do you think that output is going to be? So if you said global, local, global, then you're correct, because that is the order that it's functioning. And whenever we're console logging outside of the function, we're looking at the global value. And whenever we're console logging the defined value within the scope of the function, then we're looking at this local value of BB. And essentially that's how it works with the scope of values within functions. And sometimes this can be confusing, but always think about it that if you're declaring the variable within the function, then you want to use that only within that function, and you don't want to try to access it out externally. And another thing to keep in mind as well is whenever you're naming all your variables and values, you don't want to really have a global value and a local value with that same variable setup. Although you can, it's usually best practice to keep everything separate and to use a really good naming convention in order to better understand what these values are going to be used for and the purpose of these values. And it is encouraged as well that you do take a look through this code, try it out, check out all the different things that you can make happen within the code using functions. Now in upcoming lessons, we're going to be looking at the DOM. And the DOM is really one of my favorite pieces of JavaScript. And once you connect into the DOM, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities between JavaScript and your HTML code and CSS, of course. And that's what's coming up in the next lesson. So it's really exciting. We're going to start looking at the DOM. And we're actually going to be able to move out of using our brackets and flip back to CodePen, because the DOM is going to give us the ability to not use console log and output content directly within the web page. So that's all coming up in the next set of lessons.